All right, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. Yeah. Welcome back, everybody, to Dharma Doors. I'm MC Owens, and this is the San Francisco Dharma Collective. And tonight we're going to study another sutta. But before we dive into that tonight, just a quick announcement. So this will be the final Dharma Doors for the year. I'm going to be taking December off. So no Dharma Doors in December, and we'll be back in January. So this will be the last one for 2025. So I'm glad you could be here for us for this tonight. Tonight we are going to conclude, actually. So this is fortuitous. We're going to conclude our kind of little study of these 10 little suttas in the Majjhima Nikāya, the middle length discourses. We're over on page 892. We're going to be talking about Sutta number 110. Um, this is the shorter discourse on a full moon night. I, of course, would have liked this to have lined up with a nice full moon, but you can't have everything in that way. But we're going to dive into the teaching. It's a little sutta. It's a little short one, but I actually think it'll give us a lot to think about. It'll give us a lot to think about in terms of the actual sutta, but then we're also going to take a step back and kind of look at or think about all 10 of the suttas that we've been working on because they're part of a little group. So we're going to think about that. Um, Tonight's sutta it's short, it's simple. It's a little complicated in terms of language. There's like just a couple of tricky words that in many ways the whole sutta revolves around these couple of words. So let's kind of ease our way into the sutta so we can get to those complicated words. And if you don't have this copy, there's a link online, or you can just kick back and relax and listen. Um, but this again is going to be Sutta 110, the Cūḻapuṇṇama Sutta. So the little sutta on a full moon night. Yeah. So this one starts just like every sutta. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Buddha, the Blessed One, the Bhagavan, was living at Savatthi. This time, tonight, he's in the Eastern Park in the palace of Migara's mother. On that occasion, the Upasatta day, the full moon, the 15th day, on the full moon night, the Blessed One was seated in the open, surrounded by the Sangha of bhikkhus. Then, surveying the silent Sangha of bhikkhus, he addressed them thus. Bhikkhus, would an asapurisa, would an unrighteous person know of an unrighteous person? This person is an unrighteous person. So that's the beginning of the question. So tonight's sutta is about the sapurisa and the asapurisa, the righteous person and the unrighteous person. Now, really quickly, let me share with you the little complexity of this word real quick. So the root of the word that we're going to be working with tonight is this sap, S-A-P, purisa, P-U-R-I-S-A, sapurisa. And that word is sapurisa, and sap, S-A-P, it means to to honor, to sort of pay respect to. It's, I believe, where the English word supplicate comes from, which is sort of this kind of bowing before someone. So that's the sap part. And then this is a sap purisa. And purisa is related to the word that you might know, purusha, purisa. And it's a word that's being translated as, well, I'm going to translate it tonight as a person. Now, what I would like you to know is that the word purisa, it is often translated as a man. And there's kind of reasons to do that. But the word is functioning the way that, this happens in English. It's the way that the word like man, becomes like mankind. And even though we are talking about all of mankind, men and women included, there's a way that the man part sort of kind of dominates, even though we're talking about people. Interestingly, in the Pali Sanskrit language, a purisa is functioning the same way, where it is a word that is about people, like the human species, but unfortunately, a purisa, is understood to be male, or again, it's like that word man. So, in order to avoid misunderstanding, I'm going to do my best tonight to keep this as just a righteous person and an unrighteous person, because nothing we're talking about tonight has anything to do with sex or gender in that way. This is about behavior. So I just want to put that out there, that that's the complicated word, a sappurisa, a purisa, a person worthy of respect or honor. So a righteous person. Or an asapurisa, an unrighteous person. Okay, so that's what the sutta is about. Being a righteous person, being an unrighteous person. If there's a few already, I can tell, but for like the super Dharma heads in the audience, this word, sappurisa, asapurisa, these are not technical terms. There's nothing fancy about these words. So we are basically talking about like a good person and a bad person, a righteous person and unrighteous person. So it's very basic in that way. So now with that understanding, let's go back. The Buddha says to the audience, bhikkhus, would an unrighteous person know of an unrighteous person? This person is an unrighteous person. And the bhikkhus, the audience, they all say, no, Venerable Sir. And the Buddha says, sadhu bhikkhave, excellent bhikkhus, good bhikkhus. Yeah, it's impossible. It cannot be that an unrighteous person should know of an unrighteous person. This person is an unrighteous person. But would an unrighteous person know of a righteous person? This person is a righteous person. And the bhikkhus reply, no, Venerable Sir. Sadhu bhikkhave, excellent bhikkhus. It is impossible. It cannot be that an unrighteous person should know of a righteous person. This person is a righteous person. Okay, so the Buddha's talking about this idea of like somebody, and by the way, the Buddha is about to define all of this. So the Buddha is about to give us a very clear definition of what a righteous person is and what an unrighteous person is. So I'm not even going to bother. I'm not going to get into that. But I do want to clarify that what the Buddha is talking about is like, would an unrighteous person be able to look at somebody else and know that they're righteous or not? And the Buddha is saying, no, they wouldn't know. Now, just to give you a little sneak peek, the Buddha is going to say, or he's going to ask the bhikkhus, but could a righteous person know of an unrighteous person that they are unrighteous? And the answer is going to be, yeah, they would know that. And a righteous person would know, oh, yeah, that's a righteous person. So that's sort of the idea. That's like the backdrop. But now let's dig a little deeper into like what defines, according to the Buddha, being a righteous person or not. So there's a couple of steps to this. First up, bhikkhus. An unrighteous person is possessed of bad qualities, asadharma. So we're going to get to that term in a second too. So an unrighteous person is possessed of not true dharma, bad qualities, such as an unrighteous person, they associate, they're like friendly, or they not friendly exactly, but they associate as an unrighteous person. They will, like willpower, they will as an unrighteous person. They counsel, they give counsel as an unrighteous person. They speak as an unrighteous person. They act as an unrighteous person. They hold views as an unrighteous person. And they give gifts as an unrighteous person. So those are now the bad qualities, the asadharma. So the root of this, of course, is our beloved word dharma, the idea of truth, right? But truth can also, or dharma can also be like teachings, things of that nature, even qualities. And the Buddha's talking about sad dharma, true dharma, sat dharma, sadharma, the true dharma. And he's talking about asadharma. And so an unrighteous person, an asapurisa, is possessed of asadharma. All right? And the Buddha said that those bad qualities, the asadharma, the bad qualities of the unrighteous person, are about how they associate with others, their intentions, their will in that sense, the way that they counsel others, the way that they speak, the way that they act, the way that they hold views, and the way they give gifts. But in a beautiful sutra fashion, the Buddha now is going to tell us and define all of those. So, and how is it, bhikkhus? How is it that an unrighteous person is possessed of bad qualities? Well, here, an unrighteous person has no faith, now the text has shame, but I prefer the term or the translation self-respect. We mean the same thing. If in English we say you have no shame, you have no self-respect. I prefer self-respect. So the bad qualities here of an unrighteous person, that they have no faith, they have no self-respect, they have no fear of wrongdoing. This is about having remorse for bad actions. We'll get to it in a second. Further bad qualities of such a person, they are unlearned, lazy, forgetful, and unwise. So we have 7 qualities of an unrighteous person. That's how an unrighteous person is possessed of bad qualities. And how does an unrighteous person associate as an unrighteous person? Well, here, an unrighteous person has for friends and companions those recluses and Brahmins and other practitioners who have no faith, who have no self-respect, who have no fear of wrongdoing, who are unlearned, lazy, forgetful, and unwise. That's how an unrighteous person associates as an unrighteous person. Okay, so we have these two kind of things going on. A righteous person and an unrighteous person, and then good qualities and bad qualities. And the Buddha is now talking about the first of these ways of being, which is about associating, and he's smashing together the two ideas in that sense. So what does it mean to have bad friends or bad associates? Well, you associate with those people that have the bad qualities that we're trying to avoid. Now, really quickly, just because this is a short sutra and I would like us all to be on the same page, a couple of words about a few of those. So first up, faith. Very important idea in Buddhism. This is how I understand the idea of faith. So if you've studied Buddhism, you may have heard of the Four Noble Truths. And you might have heard of the first noble truth about suffering. And you might have heard about the second noble truth, sort of what's causing the suffering. And the noble truth, according to the Buddha, is that suffering is caused by like craving, desire, and clinging, right? And it's a pretty simple formula. The more intense the craving and the clinging, the more intense the suffering. The less intense the clinging, the less intense the craving, the less intense the suffering. It is a simple karmic equation. Now, hearing that, you might be like, maybe desire's causing my suffering. Maybe it's my next door neighbor. I don't actually know, Buddha. I'm not 100% confident. I'm not 100% certain that attachment and clinging and desire is actually causing my suffering. I'm on the fence. Could be, maybe not be. That is not having faith. That's being uncertain. It's about being unclear. Being like, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Faith, in Buddhism, as I understand it, faith is knowing. Oh, yeah. Craving is suffering. Yeah, totally. That is totally the cause of my suffering. I get it. I get it, Buddha. I'm not, I'm still suffering because of my craving, but I have no doubt about that truth. That would be the idea of faith. My point is that it's not blind faith. It's not like, well, I don't really know if suffering is caused by clinging and attachment, but the Buddha says it is, so it's good enough for me. That is not the kind of faith that we are looking for, at least in my kind of form of Buddhism. It is actually coming to an understanding yourself and being like, oh, that's how it's working. And then boom, that is confidence or certainty or faith in the Dharma. So that's a good quality. A bad quality, or an asadharma in this case, is this not having faith. This kind of wishy-washy, maybe it is, maybe it isn't kind of a mentality. So that's the first of these qualities, the idea of having no faith. Then there's something called hri. Hri is this idea of like, again, it's being translated as shame, but it's just about this idea of like, it's this idea that like, that basically like, if you say you stole something, and certainly if you got caught, but even if you didn't get caught, a sense of like, I shouldn't have done that. That's hri. That's the idea of like shame. It's not this like guilt. Ugh, ugh, No, no, no. We don't want guilt. We want thoughtfulness and a kind of, again, it's this idea of self-respect in that way. Versus the other one, which is this idea of a fear of wrongdoing. These, by the way, remorse is a good translation. I often would translate it as remorse. And by the way, these two, Hri and Avataptra, I think it is, don't quote me on that second one, but they have to do actually with one is future looking. That is the idea of Hri or self-respect. It's kind of like, what would people think of me if I did that? Versus the other one, remorse or fear of wrongdoing, is actually about past actions that you've already done them and you should reflect on them. And, again, this is not about guilt, but it's just a sense of remorse for bad actions in the past or a kind of fear of doing wrong, bad action in the future. So those are those two. And then some classic ones in Buddhism, but being unlearned. So just not studying, not caring in that sense about learning. Laziness, forgetfulness, and being unwise. All pretty straightforward, I think, in terms of definitions. Any questions, comments, answers, or ideas before we move on ahead? All right. So that's our first aspect of being an unrighteous person. It's the associating as an unrighteous person, and you're associating with people that have those bad qualities. Next up, and how, bhikkhus, how does an unrighteous person will, like intend, have intentions as an untrue or unrighteous person? Well, here, an unrighteous person wills for their own affliction, or they will for the affliction of others, or they will for the affliction of both self and other. That's how an unrighteous person wills as an unrighteous person. So when we're talking about the idea of willing one's own affliction, there could be, in a way, no kind of better example of this than addiction. And what I mean by that is it's the intending to do something that's going to cause yourself affliction, and you don't want to do that, but you do it nonetheless. That is willing for your own affliction in that way. Or you might be a jerk and will for other people to suffer, hoping that somebody has a bad day or whatever it might be. Or you might be really, whatever, and will your own affliction and the affliction of others. So I just want us to be on the same page that what we're talking about, the opposite of this would be, willing, hoping for the relief of suffering of others. Like hoping and willing that others are doing good, not being afflicted. And of course, hoping and willing for myself not to be afflicted in that way. So that's how a unrighteous person wills as an unrighteous person. They are willing or hoping or intending for their own demise in that way. Indeed, no, a misery loves company. That is part of the idea of that, right? It's a downward spiral in that sense. All right, so that's about willing, this kind of idea of, you might think of it as samkalpa, having intentions and intending for affliction. Next up is, and how, bhikkhus, does an unrighteous person counsel others as an unrighteous person? Well, here an unrighteous person counsels for their own affliction, or they counsel for the affliction of others, or they counsel for the affliction of both self and others. That's how an unrighteous person counsels as an unrighteous person. Now, my sense from the language here is that they have in mind, somebody who is, maybe going to be um, a counselor to like maybe a king or somebody of power, and they're providing advice and giving counsel. And an unrighteous person would be like, you should go kill them all. That's what you should do. Go to war. That would be counseling as an unrighteous person, and it would be counseling for the affliction of others. Or, of course, you can counsel others for one's own affliction in that way. Like, hey, I'm thinking about going and, doing something dangerous and harmful to my body. Want to help me? That kind of idea, right? So that's the willing or counseling for one's own affliction. So both those ideas, willing and counseling, are based on this idea of causing affliction or not. Next up is speech. And how, bhikkhus, does an unrighteous person speak as an unrighteous person? Here, bhikkhus, an unrighteous person speaks falsely, they speak maliciously, they speak harshly, and they gossip. That's how an unrighteous person speaks as an unrighteous person. These four qualities of speech, the quality of either lying, being mean or harsh, and gossiping. These are the four aspects of language that Buddhism always talks about. This is the aspect of vocal karma or just speech karma. This is always the prescription in Buddhism, to avoid those four types of speech. An unrighteous person does not avoid those four types of speech. They're all about it in that way. So no problem lying, no problem raising their voice, no problem gossiping, talking about people that aren't in the room, all of that. So that's the unrighteous use of speech. And how, bhikkhus, does an unrighteous person act? So bodily karma now. What kind of bodily karma does the unrighteous person perform as an unrighteous person? Well, here an unrighteous person kills living beings, takes what has not been given, and misconducts themselves in sensual pleasures. That's how an unrighteous person performs action as an unrighteous person. If you've been studying Buddhism, these, of course, should not be a surprise. However, let's reflect for a moment on the wonderful particular use of language here. So, not killing living beings, we have no problem with that. We are all about ahimsa, all about nonviolence. Not stealing, but notice the language. Attadana is about not taking what has not been offered. It's a subtle difference there, but it's this idea that it's okay if people have offered it in that sense, but it's if it hasn't been offered. And then our third one is just, let me make sure I get the language right, misconduct in sensual pleasures. I particularly like this one because it is kind of rolling together what is normally one about intoxication and one about sexuality. And it's just rolling them together as sensual pleasures and misconduct in sensual pleasures. I like that language. It's a very, I think, skillful way of talking about it in that sense, especially if we're householders in that way, if we're married in that way. So this is about skillful, good use of sexuality in that sense. I don't think there's a skillful use of inebriation in Buddhism in that sense. But it's still this idea of sort of a kind of just misconduct around these things. So that's actions of the body and actions of the mouth. So we did speech karma and bodily karma. And then next up are views, drishtis. Now, if you've been coming to Dharma Doors lately, you know that a lot of these suttas that we've been looking at in this section are about views. And this idea of like either, religious views, political views, world views, that's the idea of a drishti. And now we're talking about an unrighteous person's adoption of views. And how, bhikkhus, does an unrighteous person hold views as untrue or as an unrighteous person? Well, here, an unrighteous person holds views like this. There's nothing given, nothing offered, there's nothing sacrificed. There's no fruit or result of good or bad actions. There's no this world, there's no other world, there's no mother, there's no father, there's no beings who are reborn spontaneously in deep meditative states. There's no good or virtuous recluses or Brahmins in the world who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world. That is how an unrighteous person holds views as an unrighteous person. Let's unpack that because there's a lot in there. So, in case you missed it, these are the wrong views. This is not the views to hold. So, the first stuff is this idea that there's nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed. So, what the Buddha is sort of talking about here, by the way, all of these views that there's nothing given, all of that, this is basically what we would in the modern world probably call nihilism in that sense, a sort of uh, a kind of futility, you might call it, but there is no point in doing anything. Meaning when they're talking about nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed, they're talking about, beggars coming, begging for food and, maybe giving them a donation, giving them food or what have you, or even the performance of a ritual. The idea that that has no efficacy, or for example, the idea that there's no fruit of good or bad action. Yeah, do whatever you want. It doesn't even matter. That's a wrong view. All right. So all of this way of thinking is a wrong way of thinking. Also included in that is the idea that there's no world. This could be the kind of a kind of form of existential solipsism where you don't believe in an external world, that there's no world, there's no heaven, there's no other world, there's no mother or father. Fascinating, kind of also extreme nihilism. When it says no beings reborn spontaneously, they're actually talking about going into deep meditative states and having transcendent experiences. They're saying, nope, that's not real. That doesn't happen. And all of those yogis and recluses and Brahmins that are out there in the woods, they're all wasting their time. There's no benefit to that. And in fact, there's nobody who has realized anything. It's all just chatter. Those are all wrong views, the views held by the unrighteous. Any questions about all of those? By the way, we're going to circle back around to all of this. So, okay. So that's I think our sixth. I think we have one more aspect. Ah, yes. And this is, I find really interesting. It might be the most interesting part of the sutta. The last thing that the Buddha is going to talk about regarding the actions or whatever of an unrighteous person is the way that they give gifts. And how, bhikkhus, how does an unrighteous person give gifts as an unrighteous person? Well, here, an unrighteous person gives a gift carelessly, gives it not with their own hands, gives it without showing respect, gives what is actually to be thrown away or discarded, and gives it with the view that nothing will come of it. That's how an unrighteous person gives gifts as an unrighteous person. I particularly find interesting that last one, that idea that it's like it's kind of unrighteous behavior to give a gift, but be like, but nothing will come of that. It's very interesting. There's almost a way in which that thought is what kills it in a way. Like the belief that that nothing will come of it is what makes nothing come of it in that sense. So this last part is about dana, by the way, if you didn't know the word. This is about generosity or giving. And these are all various ways to give unskillfully in that sense. Any of those ring out as not making any sense? Pretty straightforward. Good advice. Yeah. All right. That unrighteous person, bhikkhus, thus possessed of asadharma, of bad qualities, who thus associates as an unrighteous person and wills as an unrighteous person and counsels as an unrighteous person and speaks as an unrighteous person and acts as an unrighteous person and holds views as an unrighteous person and gives gifts as an unrighteous person. On the dissolution of the body after death, they reappear in the destination of unrighteous people. And what is the destination of unrighteous people? It is hell or the animal realm. All right, before we get to the righteous person, because now we are at the halfway point, we could have a conversation about going to hell or being reborn as an animal if anybody is interested in that. Is everybody, I know this is always, kind of a hot topic in that way. Is everybody okay with, for me, whenever Buddhism is talking about hell in that way, I would really suggest everybody not, imagine the kind of Dante-esque mythological realms of hell in that way, but rather actually think about like somebody in the depths and the throes of addiction and just living in an utter personal hellscape in that way. I think they're talking about that much more than devils with pitchforks and things like that. It's the hell of our own making. So just want to point that out there. So, ready to hear about the righteous person? Okay. Bhikkhus. Would a righteous person know of a righteous person? This person is a righteous person. Yes, venerable sir, the bhikkhus replied. Sadhu bhikkhave. Excellent bhikkhus, the Buddha replied. It is possible for a righteous person to know of a righteous person. This person is a righteous person. But bhikkhus, would a righteous person know of an unrighteous person? This person is an unrighteous person. Yes, venerable sir, the bhikkhus replied. Sadhu bhikkhave, excellent bhikkhus. It is indeed possible that a righteous person would know of an unrighteous person that this person is an unrighteous person. Bhikkhus, a righteous person is possessed of sadharma, of good qualities. They associate as a righteous person. They will as a righteous person. They counsel as a righteous person. They speak as a righteous person. They act as a righteous person. They hold views as a righteous person. And they give gifts as a righteous person. And how is it that a righteous person is possessed of sadharma, of good qualities? Well, here, a righteous person has faith. They have self-respect. They have fear of wrongdoing. They have remorse for their past bad actions. They are learned. They are energetic. They are mindful, and they are wise. That's how a righteous person is possessed of good qualities. So obviously we're dealing with, not having faith, having faith. I already mentioned a few things about faith. We're talking about having self-respect versus not having self-respect. We're having that remorse versus not, being learned versus not. And then this idea of either having energy, being energetic, or being lazy. I want to talk about that one, but then just really quickly, I wanted to mention that these last two, being mindful and being wise. Whereas, what was the other one? Yeah, being forgetful versus being mindful. And then, of course, being unwise and wise. But I want to talk really quickly, just because we have the time, I want to talk really quickly about that idea of laziness or lethargy, sloth and torpor, you might know it as in the world of Buddhism. So this is one of the hindrances, laziness. And the opposite of it, of course, is this virya, a kind of drive or determination. I like to think of it as like, I gotta get up and go in that sense, right? And the thing to think about with Buddhism is it's to really kind of examine tendencies towards lethargy or tendencies towards laziness in that way. And in particular, what I'm thinking of, it's about examining the way that, like, we might think that laziness is like good for us. And what I mean by that is it's the idea that like I deserve to not do anything type of a thing. Like that idea of laziness that like I would prefer to just sort of lay around and not do anything. Oh, but I got to go do all this stuff. But I would prefer this sort of lazy, you know, more low energy situation. And it's this idea that that would be good for me. And I don't mean good for me like necessarily healthy wise, but it's this idea that it would make me happy. The shift is about actually recognizing that is not in any way good for you. That it's actually very it's good for you actually to be driven and to have energy and to have drive in that sense. So it's about reflecting that the kind of it, in Buddhism we would call it a viparaya, a inverted thinking or upside down thinking. And it's the inverted thinking is thinking that, oh, if I didn't do anything today, that would be great. That's inverted thinking in that way. Now, I'm not talking about meditating. That's doing something in that sense. So I'm not talking about that in terms of activity or productivity. I'm not talking about productivity. I'm just talking about this kind of, again, an idea that it would be beneficial to me to be lazy. And it's about a shift in mentality in that sense that, oh no, it would be beneficial for me to have energy and drive and determination in that sense. To finish projects, for example, that would be good for me in that sense. So that's that idea. Just wanted to mention that the kind of the reason why it's one of the five hindrances, that idea of laziness, like a lot of things in life, we can think that they're beneficial when really they're detrimental. And so that's a lot of Buddhism is kind of waking up to those inversions in that way. So, all right. So now we have our good dharmas, our saddharmas, our good dharmas of the righteous person. Again, they're just the opposite of the unrighteous person's activities in that way. And now let's find out. Number one, and how, bhikkhus? How does a righteous person associate as a righteous person? Well, a righteous person has for their friends and their companions those who have faith, those who have self-respect, those who do have a fear of wrongdoing or remorse, those who are learned, those who are energetic, those who are mindful, and those who are wise. That's who the righteous person makes their friends. That's how a righteous person associates as a righteous person. And how, bhikkhus? How does a righteous person will? How do they will as a righteous person? Well, here, a righteous person, they do not will for their own affliction. Who would do such a thing, right? They do not will for their own affliction. They do not will for the affliction of others. Who would will for such a thing? And they don't will for the affliction of both self and others. That's a lose-lose situation. That's how a righteous person wills as a righteous person. They do not will for affliction. And just to follow that up, how does a righteous person counsel others as a righteous person? Well, here, a righteous person, they do not counsel for their own affliction. They do not counsel for the affliction of others. And they definitely don't counsel for the affliction of both self and others. That's how a righteous person counsels as a righteous person. And how, bhikkhus, does a righteous person speak as a righteous person? Well, here a righteous person abstains from false speech, from malicious speech, from harsh speech, and from gossip. That's how a righteous person speaks as a righteous person. And how does a righteous person act as a righteous person? Well, here, a righteous person, they abstain from killing living beings. They abstain from taking what has not been given, and they abstain from misconduct in sensual pleasures. That's how a righteous person acts as a righteous person. And how, bhikkhus, does a righteous person hold views as a righteous person? Well, here, a righteous person holds such views as this. There is indeed what is given and what is offered and what is sacrificed. There is fruit and results of good and bad actions. There is this world. There is the other world. There is mother and father. There are beings who are reborn spontaneously in the heavenly realms. There are indeed good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins in the world who definitely have realized for themselves by direct knowledge and declare it for the world and the other world. That's how a righteous person holds views as a righteous person. I want to hold off on the last one real quick because I want to say a few more things about views. Hearing this in the positive sense in that way, that a righteous person does in that sense believe, so to speak, in what is given in that way. I want to say something or mention something. We have a lot of time. We're almost done with the sutta. So it has to do with a certain idea that's being presented in this list of views. So this idea that there is efficacy to action, that's kind of the main one that I want to focus on. So I guess I'm thinking specifically about that there is fruit and results of good and bad actions. So this is something that I think it's really kind of important to contemplate and think about. And what it is I wanted to pause and talk about this because of a number of things that came up in the sutta, but it's about sort of this sort of very mechanistic view of the world that Buddhism has. It's what's very interesting about it. And it's this idea that there's a sort of, like a mechanism, you might know it as karma, but it's really just the law of cause and effect in that way. And it's very important, actually, in the world of Buddhism that we understand that there is cause and effect, that there is what we would call karmic consequences, good and bad. But the most important thing to kind of know about this is that there is no workaround. And what I mean by that is that there's no divinity, there's no God exactly that is overseeing this. In fact, what's kind of in a way I think it's actually the most kind of it's impressive, but it's kind of the most radical thing about Buddhism. Yeah, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it is the most radical thing about Buddhism. And it's this idea that, yeah, there are spirits and even gods. There is even Brahma, the like creator god. But even they are subject to the laws of cause and effect. And so, what makes Buddhism really unique, what makes it so interesting, is that you might have heard this, but the Buddha, is not a god. A Buddha is one who understands karma, to put it kind of simply. And that means that a god could wake up to the realities of karma. A human being could wake up to the realities of karma. It's not about the being exactly, it's about the waking up to the realities of karma. Now, I'm going to say a few more things about that. When it comes to this idea of like good and bad results or good and bad action in that way, I would want to remind everybody, a lot of you have probably heard this from me before, but another thing that I think makes Buddhism very interesting when it comes to like these ideas of good or bad, a very classic example that gets used a lot, I use it a lot, it's the example of having something very rich, like a really rich chocolate cake or something. And it's this idea that if you ate the entire chocolate cake, you would probably get a stomach ache. And the stomach ache would probably not feel very good. Now, we could call that bad, or we could just call it the result of eating an entire chocolate cake. Whereas if you have just a nice thin slice, it's yummy, it's delicious, and you don't get sick. In other words, if you want a yummy, delicious time, you know how to achieve that. You want a stomach ache? You want to be, feel bad? You know how to achieve that. The choice is yours. And it's not about good or bad, actually. From a Buddhist point of view, it's about suffering or not. We don't actually even need to call it good or bad. We just can call it suffering or not. And the choice is yours. And the idea is that if you would like to not suffer, there are karmic actions that you can put into place that will begin the process of the alleviation of suffering. And from a Buddhist point of view, you could go all the way to the complete cessation of suffering. That's called nirvana. Or, of course, you know the other direction. And it can get worse and worse and worse in that way, in terms of anxiety and stress and what have you. So again, it's not about necessarily good or bad. It's about understanding that actions of the body, actions of the voice, and actions of the mind all have consequences. And there's really nowhere to hide from these consequences. Because again, it's just sort of like a very mechanistic view of the world, which is that if you eat the whole cake, you get sick. That's it. That's how this is all working in that way. From a Buddhist point of view, though, many of us are sort of, what's the term? Like wringing our hands, wondering, why is this happening to me? Why am I suffering? It's not a mystery, actually, from a Buddhist point of view. It's actually really clear why we're suffering. Now, why do I keep doing it is probably, that's a different question, right? The why do I keep doing it? But knowing the thing that you're doing that is causing the suffering, it's not a mystery in that sense. So, just wanted to mention a few things about just sort of what we're talking about here. This idea that the unrighteous person, for example, if we go back, that other unrighteous person, right, says there are no consequences, there's no results of good or bad action. That's an unrighteous person's attitude. And it is the righteous person, or in this sense, a Buddhist attitude, to understand, oh no, all actions have consequences. That's just what we're up against. So, any thoughts, questions, comments, or ideas about results of action in that sense? Yeah, Maria, love to hear from you.
Okay, there we go. Um, so, this plagues me, this whole thing about the force of karma, and I'm back at this hair's breadth of opportunity to make a different choice. Or is it just the sense of a choice that comes from, beginningless
Hmm.
time? And like I'm thinking about the people who find themselves in a hell realm, and I'm thinking about, I don't know what sutra it was, but there's this image of these hell beings throwing themselves against a hot thing, I think it is, over and over and over again. And where's the, like, so is the understanding that it might be millions or billions of lifetimes before that hair's breadth of
Mm,
opportunity is taken, or that being encounters the Dharma or whatever it might be. What is it that breaks that, or maybe it's unfathomable. um so
mm,
yeah, it's this idea of how much of that is illusion or delusion, and how much of it, I mean, it's clear we can see, especially with regard to walking the path, that our actions have efficacy. I can feel myself getting freer, um, as a result of my actions and training. So I don't know if you have comments on that.
mm. So, just in case if you don't know about it, I have to share with you. So, Maria was referencing, so you may or may not know this, but in classical traditional Buddhism, there's not only one hell, there's 18 levels of hell, right? And so depending on exactly how, bad in a way the situation is, you go down in that sense. And Maria was describing a particular hell, and it's one of my favorites to describe because it really for me gets the point across that I was kind of referencing earlier, that I wouldn't think I would discourage you from thinking of this in a mythological way. So here is the description of this one particular hell realm. What it is that there's this giant iron pillar that is it's searing hot. It's hotter than hot. But this particular hell realm is really funny because what it is that you are reborn in that hell realm, standing right in front of this scalding hot pillar that you have an uncontrollable desire to grab and hug. At which point you you burn up only to be reborn in the exact same hell realm right in front of the pillar, and you grab it again and are reborn again, and you grab it again, and it is the hardest hell to get out of because of the time span that you have to make a different choice, because there is this instinctual habit of grabbing the pole. As you can see, that might be a very wonderful description for a certain mental condition in that way, right? So that's what Maria was mentioning. I will throw out a few ideas, or just actually one idea. So this is just sort of like, I think everybody will understand why I'm saying it. It's in response to what Maria was just talking about. Something to think about is, so, Maria's comment or question was about, making choices. What's wrapped up in this is like ideas of agency, right? And something I would suggest is, from a Buddhist point of view, so I don't know if you're like this, but I'm like this. And what it is I know that when I'm having trouble focusing or concentrating in that way, basically, having trouble getting work done, I find, and you probably find this as well, I find that it's very helpful if I clean my environment. If it's all kind of chaotic and messy, right? But when I get everything kind of neat, I find that, I can kind of focus and I can kind of think. And that's actually kind of a very Buddhist approach to things, which is rather than thinking so uh, sharply about things in terms of like, um, I need to get that done. So I better do, so it's very narrow in that. Maybe there's a way in which we change the environment because there's an understanding in Buddhism that all of this is very interconnected, deeply, deeply, deeply interconnected in that way. And so, Maria, what I'm getting at is that not just in terms of cleaning one's space, but what I'm thinking about, or what's coming to my mind from the sutta tonight, is that idea of associating with righteous people who have faith, who are learned. Well, that's a lot like having a nice room, right? Where my associates and my friends are all conducive to the alleviation of suffering in that way. So I think a lot of what the sutta is about environment in that way, and not just this sort of one-to-one action in that sense. Or at least there's aspects of that in the sutra. So I don't know, Maria, that's just something that came to mind as far as trying to seize those, or actually not seizing those opportunities, but ways of actually creating a support around you so that you kind of instinctually make those better choices and better decisions in that way. So, Maria.
You create the conditions for a tendency to form. It's much looser than, yeah.
Well said. Well said. She condensed it down to a nice sentence. My rambling. Thank you. Any other thoughts, comments before we finish up the sutta? Noe?
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I appreciate that.
Oh, I lost you, Noe. You froze up.
Is in here.
Oh,
Sorry, I'm still here. Can you hear me now?
yeah. Just say it again because I lost you.
I appreciate that the term, the psychology, because the hell realm is here as I point to my head, whatever that is. Yes? And so that addictive behavior, that addictive pattern, those unskillful behaviors, those unskillful habits that I've moved away from. It's taken me a while, but it doesn't matter. At least it's today. And yet throughout the day, those choices come up, and I can get myself into a lot of trouble by, stepping over that person who's trying to sell stolen goods on the street rather than going around. Or maybe I'll buy something. I don't know. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that I understand the writings of and the mythology of it, but I tend there's a personalization of this is hell if I want it to be. I mean, or if it is, I find myself in hell sometimes. My back hurts. It still hurts. Ay, bay. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. And thank you that it's all here and now. Thank you.
Excellent. So, Noe, I have to share it. You've heard it before. Many people have heard it before, but I have to share it in case you haven't, because it's come up now a few times. So I'd love to share with everybody. This is the classic Buddhist, Zen Buddhist way of explaining heaven and hell in Buddhism. So it's one of my favorite stories, so I will share it with you. This is the quick abbreviated version, but it's about a samurai in Japan, medieval Japan, studying under a Zen master, a great Zen teacher. And after years of studying, the samurai goes to his Zen teacher and just is, just overwhelming with how much he's learned. But he says to his teacher, but there's one thing about this Buddhism that I don't get. And the Zen teacher says, tell me, what's your question? And he's like, well, you Buddhists are so like rational and so wise. So why do you guys talk about heaven and hell all the time? Like, isn't that irrational? And the Zen master goes, yeah, but you're a samurai, so you probably couldn't understand anyways. And the samurai goes, he's respectful, but he's respectfully, teacher, I think I can understand. And the teacher goes, yeah, but you're also from a, lower class. So no offense or anything, but you just really couldn't understand. And so the Zen teacher just keeps berating the samurai and putting him down. And the more he's putting the samurai down, the angrier the samurai is getting. And eventually, the samurai puts his hand on his sword. And the Zen master goes, yeah, that's it. That's it. Open the gates of hell. And right at that moment, the samurai paused and he bowed down and he said, Master, open the gates of heaven. And it's a great story about where is hell, where is heaven. So I had to share it. It's coming up. But yeah. But we cannot not finish the sutta. And so, bhikkhus. And how, bhikkhus, does a righteous person give gifts as a righteous person? Well, here, a righteous person gives a gift carefully, gives it with their own hand, gives it showing respect, gives a valuable gift, gives it with the view that something will come of it. That's how a righteous person gives gifts as a righteous person. That righteous person, thus possessed of saddharma, of good qualities, who thus associates as a righteous person and wills as a righteous person and counsels as a righteous person and speaks as a righteous person and acts as a righteous person and holds views as a righteous person and gives gifts as a righteous person. Upon the dissolution of the body after death, they reappear in the destination of a righteous person. And what is the destination of a righteous person, you may ask? It is greatness among the gods, or greatness among human beings. That's what the world-honored one said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. All right, so any last thoughts about the last aspect of dana, of giving? Don't give something that you would just otherwise throw away, right? That was an aspect of unrighteous giving, right? That the what do they call it? The regifting. They're just like, well, I'm not going to use this anyways, so you have it. Nothing's going to come of it anyways. Oh, by the way, I'm going to have my friend give it to you, right? So those are all unrighteous ways of giving gifts. All right, everybody, last thoughts, ideas about the sutta? Yeah, Maria, and then Noe.
Well, there's been something that is driving me crazy, or I've been thinking about a lot for a while, and I've been waiting for an opportunity to bring it up and see what people thought about it. And I think this might be it. So it goes back to where it's about how a person acts with their body, and they don't, I can't find the exact section, but they don't act inappropriately with regard to sensual pleasures.
Yep.
So this is maybe too big for this, but Cūḷapuṇṇāma is a very, I mean, I respect his teachings. I've read several of his books. Pema Chodron studied with him. She's amazing. I love her. I don't know how to hold the fact that he drank and drugged himself to death. So I'm just wondering what other people think about that, or if there's a conversation around that. And in the context of this sutra, where does that land, and what are we supposed to do with that?
Mm.
And how does that affect, you know, our faith? And so I don't know. I just was so curious to see what you thought, or if any other people have any ideas about that.
Noe,
Thank,
thoughts?
thank you, Maria. Wow. Uh, one of our a person who saved my life at the Zen Center killed himself about a year and a half ago, and for the year and a half I have been, you know, with this question, and
Mm.
yet, what? And so it just comes for me. It just comes to compassion. I don't know what was going on. I have no idea what was going on. I will never know what was going on. But I was grateful that the last time I saw him, I was able to show gratitude towards him for, and he was very humble. He was kind of distracted, and I I honored him. So anyway, I think I finally had to let it go. I'll never know, if I may. Thank you.
Yeah, Maria. I mean, that's a big question, or a big topic, I should say. It's big for many reasons, actually. Like maybe even rather than addressing it, I'll just point out at how complicated it is in that way. So at I would say at the top level, the top layer, we have, spiritual teachers behaving badly. And, that's take your pick, meaning take your pick of traditions. It happens all over the place. And, you know, when it comes to that, all we can actually say, or I think that all we can recognize, is that all of these traditions, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, or whatever, they actually all have at least one, but they all have one understanding in common. Human beings are messed up. So when human beings behave in a messed up way, we should not be surprised. It's what they're saying. Now, we are particularly disheartened when our teachers are that, because we were hoping for more in that way. And I understand that in that way. So, first level is just recognizing that this happens all over the place. And it is unfortunate that it happens all over the place. Next level, though, that complicates this is the specifics of the Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhist tradition that has opened up, has left that door ajar, that allows for drinking, that allows for sexuality in those ways. And so that's dangerous territory, and so that's a level of that tradition. And so let me kind of I'm gonna like pry open that level and insert an idea in there. But at that level, Maria, I don't know what degree to which you are involved in that lineage, claim that lineage, or whatever. But there's also a way in which that's that lineage over there doing their thing. And in a sense, they're not abusing me. Nobody's coming to me for help. And so if people are getting something out of that tradition, so be it in that way. Um, if you know what I mean. Like if you were involved in that lineage, now there's things to deal with, if you know what I mean. But if you're not involved in that lineage, then it's kind of neither here nor there, if you see my point. In maybe a grander scale, we are concerned, but specifically, it's somebody else's problem in that sense if they choose to follow that lineage, if that makes sense. And then there's sort of the lower level. And I would say the lowest level is just sort of like the general, the lowest level is what you started with, Maria, which is just the actual thing that we were talking about, which is about misconduct with sensual pleasures. And I guess this is where it is really where the Vajrayana plays with fire, because they allow for this relationship with these sensualities and these sensual pleasures. And that's a very tricky territory to play in. This sort of like, well, I'll use sexuality to get over sexuality. Maybe, you know, it is an upaya, it's a technique in that way. But my point is that it's kind of I don't know, it's just tricky in that sense. So I always say to everybody who ever asks me that the Vajrayana only works with a guru. Nobody is wise enough to self-guide themselves through sensualities in that way. So that's a couple of ideas or a couple terms about that. I have my own issues with Trungpa Rinpoche in that sense. Yeah, after doing a lot of research into it, it's very disturbing to say the least. So, yeah. So, but yeah. So thanks, Maria. Any other questions, comments, or ideas? Noe, did you have, because I know you responded to Maria, but
Yes, it goes back to, thank you, thank you. It goes back to that part of the unrighteous person's afflictions of others, afflictions of self, afflictions of others, or afflictions of both. And it just came up to that line that I quote, I can nail myself to the tree with one hand, but I need help with the other hand. And this thing that I found myself in the past of self-pity and like, oh, but I need help with the other hand. So I incorporate other people. I used to, at least, help me, help me. Can't you see how horrible life is? And this is an affliction that's what came up for me in that terminology of Messiah syndrome,
Mhm.
and self-affliction. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Noe. Yeah, and actually for me, a lot of what Maria was commenting about Trungpa Rinpoche has to do with causing affliction to others, and oneself. Like with him in particular, it was a clear case of a lot of affliction being caused to self and other. And that's where it's like, oh, but was it in the guise of a greater wisdom or something like that? I don't know. But what's apparent is the affliction to others. So that's my um that's my guiding principle as a Buddhist, is about not causing affliction to myself and others. That's like key. So, but all right, everybody. I think Noam had a few comments, so I'm going to pause it there. Actually, the big pause for the rest of the year. So thank you all so much for being here every Sunday. Appreciate it so much. And like I said, I'll be back in January. So stay tuned.